Hi, this is Robert Kiyosaki, and you're listening to Capital Hacking. This is the most important thing you can listen to today.
All right. Robert Kiyosaki, Mr. Rich Dad, could you just wait a second before you endorse the Capital Hacking Show? We must make a public service announcement. Learn and Grow, your favorite accredited investor mastermind, the one where we can get together at one of these beautiful resorts owned by the accountable equity community and actually learn and grow together. Whether you're an investor today, thinking about it for tomorrow, or have never heard of private investing directly, it doesn't matter. This is an investor mastermind that is going to change the way you see opportunities today. We have 4 already scheduled for the year 2024, 4 in 24. They're found at accountableequity.com/learn-grow. And you're going to find out we have a March event, sign up now, an April event, choose that or sign up for that, an August event, and a December event. And we rotate through the various accountable equity resort properties. It's time to register. Plan your entire 2024. We want to be in community with you. We can't wait to have you visit.
Here's the one.
I have a dream.
With great power comes great responsibility.
I can do this all day.
This is it. Don't get scared now.
They may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom.
Cinderella story out of nowhere.
Did you know that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself?
Capital Hacking begins in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back to the big show. My name is Josh McCown. Today, we have no co-host on the show, and I apologize about that because all of us love the world famous John Edwin. I'm sure you cherish him as much as I do. He is traveling and with GoBundance today, doing such great work. So in standing in for him, I tried to do my best to share something with you about this gentleman, Matt Canning, and to do a good interview with Matt Canning. Now, Matt Canning has been on the episode before, and he's actually been on this podcast in 2019. I'll put his other episode in the show notes, but we had to get him back on. A few weeks ago, I found out that he has launched a mission-driven startup business that he's doing. A mission, what I mean by that is it comes from somewhere deep in his heart as a father. He has a daughter who he wants to make sure has a wonderful life, and she's a great person. And he's been able to get firsthand experience about ADHD, attention deficit disorder, and how it impacts people. Now, he also has great life experience of working. He's, first of all, an incredible executive, a really accomplished entrepreneur, and a friend, as well as an investor with us. But beyond that, he took his incredible capacity, business acumen, his fatherhood heart, and he put together what I think is a very compelling business. So at the end of the show, he shares what he's doing today called NOPLEX, NOPLEX. I'm so grateful he shared it. It's a methodology and tools that have been developed to support adults in the workplace and in life to deal with their ADHD and seamlessly overcome the components that really interfere with their ability to produce. So basically, he's going to share how great that tool is and what's going on there. But in the meantime, while we were talking, he said, I'd be happy to share the differences between startup venture investing directly, private direct investing in startups, and how that compares and contrasts to direct private investing in real estate funds. So I hope you like a masterclass because Matt is a master. So he's going to offer for a few moments how to compare and contrast the two types of private investing. There's others, but these are both passive. And he explains things like an SAFE, a SAFE. These are the simple agreements for future equity that allow for venture capital and businesses that are as valuable as NOPLEX to get started, and how that compares to things like what we do, Melanie and I, and the whole wonderful group at Accountable Equity, where we have funds that allow for you to make yield and growth. Obviously, at the end of the day, both types of investing, we all want yield and growth. And we went liquidity eventually. So how do you achieve that in the startup business? How do you achieve it in a real estate business? These are the topics we talk about. So I hope you enjoy this. Again, I just want to thank you, Matt Canning, so much from my heart. I'm sure you, just like me, have family members, friends, great people that are overcoming ADHD in their own way. And I think Matt has brought another great resource to the world, and I'm so grateful for that. I think you're going to love this episode. Enjoy. Matt Canning, it has been a challenge for me to get on the calendar with you. I apologize. You're like my hero here. I have your book in front of me about execution. I'm always worried about execution. But we got it. We executed on a day, and we are here in this podcast. Thank you, Matt.
Absolutely. Better late than never. Great to see you.
I'll have to look it up and put it in the show notes, but you and I have done a great podcast already. We talked all about your first awesome endeavor on your own, which was becoming a great author. We'll talk about that. We'll have that show. But for those ladies and gentlemen who have not yet met Matt Canning, could you just share a little bit about your family life? Where are you at? Where are you today? And what are you doing today? And then we'll get into some deep dives.
Sure. Yeah. I am originally from Philadelphia. I'm married with 2 children who are usually lovely. We live just outside the city in the northeast suburbs. She's an educator. I was a technologist my whole life. Went into management and eventually executive leadership in the mostly staying in the Philadelphia area. And Josh and I got connected because I'm passively involved with real estate, and some cases actively involved with real estate. And we got connected through the syndication world. And, we've crossed paths many times since. So,
yeah, no, I have a great deal of respect for you. I think you handle yourselves great. And I was excited to see if you would join me on this show because I know you've started a new venture. So would you describe for the listeners, what are you doing today? And I know you've launched a program, you're out. Tell us more about your tech business you're doing.
Sure. So, and actually to tell that, I could sort of connect how we ended up talking about this. So, so since the last podcast, which, wow, 2019, 2020, it was a while ago.
Yep.
I spent a few more years in corporate executive roles, spent a few years as vice president at a Series B funded company. And then this past summer, founded NOPLEX, NOPLEX, which is an organization and personal productivity ecosystem optimized for adults with ADHD. And it's AI driven. It's something I'm incredibly excited about. And I'm currently just a few weeks into raising capital from investors. I was on the phone with Josh. We were talking about it. And I guess I was using some terms. And he said, you know what, this is potentially a great topic for the capital hacking listeners, just because they may not be familiar necessarily with this. And it could be a world that they would love to get into, but don't really know where to begin. So yeah, ended up here with you to talk about that.
No, it is great. And it is different, but there's similarities to passive investing in deals that are similar to what you're doing. And there's passive investing similarities to real estate. So we are going to get into all that. But before we get into all the different ways people invest in this, because I think venture capital is like a different type of private equity that we have to let you explain to us. I think the best way for you to explain it was your second career jump you talked about a moment ago, where you were you were an executive in a Series B funded firm. Now, that needs definitions. So we're just going to sit back, Professor, and take a minute. Just teach us, what was a Series B company? What kind of company was it? What was the value you guys were adding? And what did you learn there?
Well, Series B is pretty far down the line. And a lot of the types of companies that people like ourselves, accredited investors in the private space, would have access to would be much earlier. So what's called a pre-seed raise or a seed raise. So one thing that I was thinking about this as I was jumping on the Zoom with you, that could be kind of cool would be if you and I just came up with a company right now off the top of our head and followed it from inception all the way through. So, all right. So come up with a service, right? Dentistry, driving, something. Just pick
All
any
right.
service.
So, I was just traveling. So let me think if I can orient it around traveling for a moment. Service. Yeah. Cause you want it to be tech based, I imagine, right? So tech
Sure.
based
Yeah.
service. Okay. So,
But any service doesn't matter.
sir. Okay, fine. A service related to taking tours of of around towns where somehow advertisements are embedded in it, so there's a money making port. But guys like me, I am curious when I get to a new town and I want to see the town.
Okay, so let's do that for pet walkers.
Great.
So a travel, it's ridiculous, obviously, a travel tour, get to know the city service for dog walkers. Okay. Makes no sense, but let's do it. All right. So I will say this, when people hear startup, in a lot of cases, they think tech. And I think that's fair. I think that is often the case. But I think it's important to create a distinction with the concept of innovation, right? There's disruptive innovation, right? Something completely, utterly different than what's been done. There's incremental or iterative, and there are a lot of examples of things that aren't necessarily tech that fit the startup mold really well. Actually, I'm not sure if you've ever had anyone on, but there's a company here in the Philadelphia area called Medcotech, who, yeah, and they've done some pretty cool stuff. They have a brick and mortar aspect, and they still, fit the mold of how a startup is built and funds itself and everything really well. So let's say you come up with an idea, right? Now, some IP attorneys, actually, real quick, I'm not an attorney. This is not advice. You're getting observations from a guy who has trouble putting a folded sheet on a bed. So take it as you will. You come up with an idea. Some IP attorneys would tell you not to go too deep into finding out if you have direct competition, because there's a concept of prior art. It could complicate intellectual property in the future. But there's nothing stopping you from figuring out, are there already tourism service for dog walkers? Does that exist? Is there a market, right? So there's the concept of market need. Obviously, you want to understand what that is, what that looks like, how big it is. You want to understand what's called product market fit, right? If there is a problem to solve, is your idea the one to solve it? And if not, how could you change the idea to be the ideal solution? And then there's the idea of founder market fit, right? Are you the person to do that? And, an example would be if I had an idea.
I love where you're going with this. And I want to back up a second because you're helping us. You're doing a lot real quick. And I think for frameworks a little bit, we came up with some service about dog walking and getting to know a town through dog walking. And you're helping us break it down very academically, which is awesome. You're saying is there prior art? Has that already been created? What would happen, by the way, if it was already created? You're saying that may complicate things.
So the best way to look at it is if you do a sort of a relatively superficial search to understand if there are already solutions, that's perfectly fine. If you're trying to figure out the exact algorithms that they are using right, that's where you don't want to get into. But if you do want to find out whether or not you are truly innovating or if you just didn't know about something that already existed. But as far as founder market fit, an example would be if I had an idea around an innovation for gas stations, right? I have absolutely no idea about that world, right? I'd be starting from scratch. I have no network. I know nothing about regulation or compliance. So I'm not the founder for that. Doesn't mean I can't make something about, around that, but I'm not the person, right? So once you sort of figure that out, it's time to understand some of the economics, and whatnot. And if you can, this is critical, validate the idea, right?
Right.
So,
and this is anything you want to do in life, to be honest with you. So now we have to validate the idea. Is this worth it? How are you going to do that?
You have to think outside the box. So one thing that really, a story I always love is there's a great business out of Philadelphia called Lula, and they've done some amazing disruptive stuff in the um, point of sale and inventory management space for convenience store chains and everything. But very early on, part of their original idea was around providing and sort of being the connective tissue for delivery services for mom and pop
Oh,
convenience stores. They put up a website, geo-fenced it to Philadelphia and South Jersey, and when people ordered, the founders went around delivering, right? I think one of them was in the middle of a PhD program, but he would get an order and he would go deliver it. And after a few weeks, they said, people are really using this. Let's build it, right? Those people didn't know that that was the founder showing up at their door and it wasn't actually even a business yet, right? But that's how they validated the idea.
oh, I get it. So again, to break that for my own, making sure I can comprehend, they did Google AdWords that
Exactly.
said, "Would you like your groceries delivered or something delivered?" I'm searching that. I see it. It says Lula or whatever it said at the time. It's like a basic landing page, is what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah.
And it's like very simple. It's a, what do they call that? Minimum viable or something like
Yeah.
that. They're just
MVP.
testing it.
Yeah, that's exactly
I love
it. You test the premise. There's the idea of come up with one critical hypothesis and see if it sticks. So that's kind of the what you want to do. And then most of the time, just for to make it much easier down the line for when you get involved with venture capital, most of the time these companies are going to be Delaware-based C corps.
Right.
Sort of, I won't get into all that here, but so our business, which actually, as I think about it, is less of a bad idea. I would walk around a city with some dog walkers. That sounds really, pet a dog, see a historic building. It sounds relaxing. But we would eventually get to the point where we needed some money, right? We would need to develop a product. We would need to do ad tests, ad tests. So we're going to need money. So you raise capital. So the first time you do that is generally called a pre-seed, SEED, not proceed, a pre-seed raise, which typically for an innovation business like this would be $1 million or less. A lot of times it's kind of friends and family. For those that are not, there's accreditation requirements exactly the same as we're all used to with the real estate syndication world. And you raise the money, usually in a case like this, to get to a point where you have truly validated the product, you have a product, you have an understanding of the unit economics and how you could scale spend to some degree linearly scale recurring revenue, right? So that's usually what a pre-seed raise will get you. A seed raise, which is usually comes a little later, that's usually a little larger. Usually there is some involvement with venture firms. Most of the time, venture firms won't get too involved with a pre-seed business. That's just not where their realm is. And that sort of very early stage startup is the sweet spot for individual investors.
Yeah. So it's after some testing has been done. So pre-seed is to get the testing, get the unit economics. I love that. So one delivery in that scenario of that Lula, one delivery may have cost, I don't know, a dollar to get the lead, multiple dollars to drive the car. And that, there you go. So then they need to charge $6 to sell it at a profit, correct? And $6 is what those families paid for that delivery. Therefore, economically, it could work. That's kind of
and there's a lot that goes in. You have to make predictions around cost per gross acquisition, including ad costs, server time, legal costs. You sort of break it all up and you say, to run this business and make a delivery, in this case, or in our case, do a tour with a bunch of collies and leashes. What will that cost and what will I make? And then you can decide for yourself whether it's worth continuing to pursue.
That's right. Okay, so now we're all the way up to seed. I love it. This is going to be the other this is going to be a good deep dive into how capital is raised for all types of businesses. So at seed and beyond, there's a sweet spot for individuals to get involved. And in technology launches and other types of startups, what would you say is a typical dollar amount per investor?
Sure, that varies quite a bit depending on the nature of the investment. Just to clarify, it's generally pre-seed and seed, which is where people can get in, and it's not being managed by a large VC firm. You will typically see minimums around 50, sometimes 25K. One thing to consider is when you bring on investors, in some cases, you're also bringing on people with a good network, good experience. Maybe they've had an innovation exit in the past and their advisory would be valuable. So as much as I'm sure a lot of people raising capital would hate to say no to their entire subscription being handled by one person, you are sort of missing out in some ways when that happens. So there is some value in having some diversity to the investor pool.
That's a great, Melanie's actually said that about what we do with Accountable Equity. She's actually found it to be a whole surprise of how much value it is to work with more than one investor. Now, that being said, that was a surprise to us in the real estate world, but I can see directly why it works in these. You're basically saying someone's going to put 50,000 up, but they may be able to do 2 introductions that allow this new product to show up on a PR release or some access point to help the product actually reach its viability.
Yeah. And it's interesting because one place where investing in an innovation startup departs pretty drastically from the real estate world is in the vehicle through which investments are typically handled, right? And so that's where it gets very different. And that's where I think
teach us what you mean. I actually would love for you to compare and contrast. What do you mean?
Sure. So as of more than a decade ago, these types of investments are typically done with a convertible vehicle called a SAFE, SAFE, which stands
put an asterisk on this. This is so cool. You and I talked about this on the phone. This is actually the most salient part that I would love for us to learn. Go for it, Professor.
This is where you said this should become a podcast. Yeah, don't waste it on me. So SAFE is a simple agreement for future equity. And this is where it gets kind of weird because
SAFE, great acronym, SAFE.
Yep.
But it's define it one more time.
Sure. It is a simple agreement for future equity, which describes it well, but if you don't know it, that doesn't have a ton of meaning. So I think, it warrants some explanation. So this was built by a company called Y Combinator a while ago and has since sort of become the standard for early raises. And this is, I'm going to do my best to explain this properly, but the idea is essentially if I come up with an idea, build a prototype, do some research, you and I could sit down and we could make a guess about what that company's value would be, right? But that's a guess, right? And so what a SAFE solves for is it defers valuation to a later time when an actual valuation takes place, right? So usually a third party will perform a valuation. There's something called a 409A. You can look into that. But basically it says you and I don't have to decide what you get for this investment. It will be decided at a later time, and we are agreeing to it now. And it's my job as the person leading the business to make it a compelling investment for you despite that ambiguity.
Right. And that therein lies a major difference in real estate. So typically in real estate, when the money comes into a fund, the fund then buys a title of real assets.
Exactly.
And so your proportion of ownership is related to that. Now, you may not know, no one will ever know how much value add you can create on that piece of real estate. So that's the ambiguity. The ambiguity is I bought title on something, I have something, but where will it be in 5 years? Let's use a pro forma model. In yours, in your industry of tech or startup or venture, this is so compelling. So the Y Combinator 12, 15 years ago, I remember I was in my MBAs actually 20 years ago, and we talked about Y Combinator. It was like a think tank. It was kind of, tell us, I don't want to get into too many different definitions, but Y Combinator was aggregating a lot of different venture capital ideas and young businesses, and they were incubating them. So you're saying out of that effort, they figured out a way to do fundraising, because before then, everybody used to talk about convertible notes or options, I think they would say. What was the normal method before the SAFE to invest?
Convertible notes were big. There are still convertible notes in that space, but again, it's sort of been to some degree replaced. As far as if I were, I'll say this: I am an investor in some early stage startups. If they handed me something other than a SAFE, that would throw me off. I would not have it. In 2024. You're typically not going to see that for an early stage startup. It covers a lot of bases.
All right, so I think that's actually something that everyone who's ever thought about this show has helped us understand a SAFE. But we have to go a little deeper.
Let's go.
A SAFE is there's not usually a preference payment, correct? There's not. Give me a sense of what you're being sold when you look at that offering memorandum.
So let's
return.
Yeah, I mean, let's go back to our dog walking tourism business, which needs a clever name. We'll think about that. But so a SAFE will typically come with two things. Well, at least one, sometimes two. One is called a valuation cap, and one is called a discount. Okay. So let's say I do a bunch of homework and I look at our business and I say, I think it's pretty reasonable that I can get this to be worth $15 million, right? And we could talk about how valuation takes place and how multiples are decided upon. But let's just say I look at it and I say, I think I can get this to 15 mil. I will set a SAFE with a valuation cap of 10 mil. And what that means is the equity that you have in the company will be relative to from the amount you invest to the value of the company at a valuation cap. So much like an option, down the line, if the company is worth 30 million, 300 million, $1 billion, you still own a piece in relation to what you invested. So keep in mind what I'm about to say is completely inaccurate, because there's common versus preferred shares. There's dilution that takes place when there's capital events. But just for the sake of simplicity, if you put $100,000 into a business that has a $10 million valuation cap, that ratio, that 1%, is that 1%? 1% that is what you own no matter what happens to the business. Now, when I said $1 billion company, that's obviously kind of unlikely, but the one thing to keep in mind is that really does happen, right? Like, I know people who got in very early on businesses that are worth more than $1 billion. It does happen.
Yeah, it's like every movie back, I don't know, a generation ago was about this, and
right.
All the books.
I mean, tech, there's that ability to scale that doesn't happen with tangible assets. So what I feel, first off, I'm a big believer in rewarding those who believe in an idea early.
Exactly.
So you set a valuation cap, and there isn't a pro forma necessarily, but even though you will see that term used sometimes, but I have to show a financial model to you that says, this is what I would have to do to get to the valuation cap. Mm-hmm. If you think that is feasible, if you think that is reasonable, then that's a compelling investment for you, right? And so, so one thing I'll say this: if anyone comes away from this podcast and decides to get into this space a bit, keep in mind that one red flag is a business not being able to talk succinctly about a path to profitability.
Right.
If they say like, oh, it's just a cool idea, hop on board. Show me what do conversion numbers look like from your free product to your premium product? What are conversion comps for other things in that price point? within that industry, what percent increase in operational expenditures do you expect for every 10,000 new users? Drill people,
Very
right?
good. Very good point. And to go back to a more even simpler way for me to grasp it.
Mhm.
So you said, let's assume you put me in at $100,000 with a cap that it would be worth 10. If it goes to a billion, then I have really good ratio of equity for that
You do.
$100,000. That's basically your point. But do I get my money back? When do I get my money? And do you usually tell me? Do you say in my projections we will have a liquidity event in 5 to 10 years or 3 years, or what do you usually say to me? And am I going to, is my 100 ever coming back, or is it just going to be, in real estate, that's our dream, is always to do a refinance of some sort, get your money back and let you stay in the deal. But in tech and in other businesses, they don't talk like that, do they? They don't talk about getting your money back. They talk about growing your money and not really having this recap event.
Exactly. But it's funny. That is one way in which I think there are big similarities. So much like real estate, in a case like this, you would say, okay, based on the nature of the business, this is our exit strategy, right? It might be acquisition, it might be merger, it might be an IPO in certain cases. In rare, I won't say rare cases, but you'll see less typically for a profitable business that can run somewhat lean. You might see dividends, things like that, right? But for the most part, it's a liquidity event. Sometimes a Series A round will trigger a liquidity event that creates liquidity for the
Okay. Yeah, that's actually the more salient thing I'm asking. That's
Yeah.
curious to me. Is it why? Is it so they can buy us out, us early investors out? Is that why
Yeah,
we're okay?
that's kind of how it works, but
Yeah.
it's still usually in most cases doesn't result in cash, it results in shares, right?
Okay.
And so where this gets kind of interesting is you cannot sell a safe unless there's an interesting legal document letting you sell the safe. But in most cases, you can't sell a safe. But
Oh,
there's a huge aftermarket for the rights to a safe, which is funny because the
wow.
safe itself is the rights to equity. So
Yeah.
it's
Yes.
right.
Exactly.
But so there are huge funds out there who basically, you're a stakeholder in a company, you're an exited executive at a company, you have a whole bunch of shares, you can't touch them because they're not liquid yet. People will essentially, there are funds that will essentially say, we will give you this much money up front, 6 cents on the dime for the agreement that within 90 days of a liquidity event, you transfer the ownership to us. So there are companies that make bets on that. And much like the venture market itself, it is very much try a lot, and those that hit big enough to justify the misses.
You happen to know, like, to make it more practical, can you remember one that you've heard of that happening right now, where there's a business, maybe a branded business that we might have heard of, that is in that process, where they're either having liquidity of some sort and these funds would be willing to buy their safe?
Well, I think with enough access to the finances and the plan, even small companies would be able to,
Liquidate
explore
some
that
of their
opportunity.
safe. Okay.
I think there are some that are highly desirable and you can get a better deal for. So, for instance, I just read the other day, was it Notion? I think it was Notion, the productivity tool. They're at this point, they're a private company worth billions of dollars, right?
Okay.
So if I show up to one of those firms and I say, "Hey, I have some note," immediately before I finish my sentence, they're probably not going to have to do the same level of due diligence. If I say, like, there's this dog walking city tour business. Wait, where are you going? Where are you going? So it depends, but there is a market there. So if for some reason you do need liquidity, there are options.
That's cool.
But generally, I'll say this: be wary of a startup that says, "Here is what we are going to do to exit." Right? There's a certain naive arrogance to that, I think, but they should have some paths what they look like, which ones are ideal given the nature of the business. But the reality is you have absolutely no idea what that could look like down the line. You could get a giant offer out of the blue kind of early on, and then you have to have a discussion about it.
That's exactly right. My friend was just telling me, and we have to get him on the show. He was saying that medical processing in the medical industry,
Sure.
they're being acquired by someone who used their services. So that happens a lot too, right? Now, before we go any further, you've done a great job being a professor, but I'm excited about NOPLEX. So the work you're doing now, you're dedicating your life to it. Tell us about this industry and why you're doing it.
Sure. So I'll spare everyone the sort of long journey of me coming to understand a good amount about adult ADHD. It started many years ago when I had an employee who asked me to be moved from near the bathroom because it was too noisy, too much traffic. And I didn't fully understand. I was like a manager at that point. All the way through, fast forward, my daughter, who is 10 years old, struggles with ADHD. And, I think much like any father, I really do want to leave the world a much better place for someone like her and give her the tools she needs. So what I've discovered in this sort of due diligence process that I described earlier is that there are abundant resources for adults with ADHD when it comes to things like behavior management, anxiety management, telehealth, educational resources. But at the end of the day, adults with ADHD are people in society with responsibilities, with commitments, everything like that. But the way that the adult ADHD mind works is different from the what are called neurotypical counterparts. And there is no cohesive sort of ecosystem of tooling available to adults with ADHD to use to sort of reach the same types of goals that we reach. Use your calendar, use your to-do lists, everything like that. So it's built with a large AI concierge aspect that helps circumvent a lot of the challenges that adults with ADHD face.
So this is something that affects many of us, our relatives, our children.
Yeah.
And you just said some really curious things like using a calendar.
Mm-hmm.
So for those of us who aren't intimate with people who are suffering tremendously with this challenge, you called it neurotypical, which maybe I'm neurotypical. I can use a calendar and kind of keep my day going.
Sure.
You're saying that the ADHD adult really struggles with even that. And I don't know if everybody knows that. Would you mind describing what is the suffering that an adult ADHD person is going through?
Sure. I'll give some examples and tie it right into NOPLEX. So there are several challenge domains that are relatively ubiquitous for adults with ADHD. Some it barely touches them, and some have very difficult time functioning because of them. So when you and I think of an event, so we're getting on this call today at 1:00, right? The start time is the language we use. It's what's in my calendar and everything like that. But the way the mind of someone with ADHD operates is they are going to have more success thinking of it not as a start time, but as the amount of time remaining before you have to act. So for instance, if I have to be somewhere that's half an hour away at 2:00, thinking of that and having that visualized for me as a countdown to 30 minutes before that event, I'm going to see a lot more success in making sure that I stop doing what I'm focusing on, begin to get there. And there's some sort of cognitive hacks around, for instance, the intensity of that visualization it's a pulsing thing. It begins to intensify as time approaches to work that way. Another one, an example that I love to give is if I'm invited to a wedding and I put a wedding in my calendar, as just anybody, there are a bunch of things you need to do around that wedding, right? You will often just sort of lose them, right? But somebody with ADHD is going to struggle more with that than most. And so this is where the AI aspect comes in. So if you put wedding in your calendar, it's going to say, I see you put a wedding in your calendar. Do you need to buy a gift?
Wow.
Yes. Okay. Well, then we'll make that a to-do item for a few weeks beforehand. Do you need to buy a dress?
Yeah.
No. Cool. Great. Do you need to get a babysitter? Oh, I do. Okay. Well, we'll put a
Wow.
task in there for you for that, right? I see that you scheduled an oil change. You obviously have a car. Do you want me to set your annual inspection? Yes.
Wow.
What month? July. Boom. Done. There it is for you, right? So it's circumventing a lot of those challenges, the things that get lost, the things that get missed. And there's an aspect of a supporter. So if there's something critical that I need to do that I cannot miss, I have to deliver medicine to an elderly relative, I can set my wife as a supporter on that task.
Oh,
So
wow.
if time is ticking, it's later in the day, I haven't done it yet, she can get a notification.
This
And,
is
you know, things like
incredible.
that. Well, thank you.
This is incredible. So
It's no dog walking business with
yeah, no,
tourism.
no.
It'll
Dogs. Yeah, well, actually dogs are big business. Pets are big business. We should do pet ADHD. No, we shouldn't. I feel for, I have this affects our family intimately.
Yeah.
So this idea of an assistant, or what did you call supporter? It's
Mhm.
almost like a to-do list with that you're keeping track of using AI, and I'm doing my life and I have these struggles, let's say. But you're saying if I don't click a button at some hour ahead of the time when I was supposed to do it, it's going to alert perhaps my relative
Yeah.
to
And
remind me.
anyone that, yeah. Yeah. So one thing that we do is we separate the cognitive modes for curation and execution. What that means is where I organize my tasks, where I sort them, where I prioritize them, add details. That's different from where it is when I focus on what I have to do that day. So there is a much more focused experience for what you have to accomplish in a day, what you commit to yourself. There's sort of analytics and insights that come away with that, which do a few things. One is it's an insurance policy for loved ones, right? It can be stressful
Oh yeah.
and create a lot of friction to live with someone who you don't consider as reliable as you need, especially in a partner. So knowing that critical things will at least get to you before they get missed is something we've gotten amazing feedback on. And there's also
I think that's amazing. That is amazing.
thanks. Yeah. And there's the whole idea of sort of reducing that friction and giving the context to have those conversations about what's working and what isn't. And there's one more aspect, which is if you do work with a therapist or a behavioral health provider or ADHD coach, you can connect to them as well. And they can understand sort of engagement, behavior, analytics, and everything, and have the conversations with you as opposed to relying on anecdotal information from their clients, which again, great feedback on. So
Yeah, and the name NOPLEX, NOPLEX. Tell us what it means. What's embedded in that name?
So one of the founding premises that I came up with, I sort of came up with a mission. Well, I should say mission statements
Yes.
around this when I first started to guide me. One was we're not trying to fix anyone. We're trying to provide the tools necessary for people to be successful. But another one is no unnecessary complexity.
Yeah,
No
that's so compelling.
plex. No plex.
That's what I perceived it to mean.
Yeah.
Which is good. So it's right
Yeah.
there in the name.
I'm glad you picked it up. So that's great.
And the model, to
Mhm.
go one level deeper, is the model it's AI backed or AI enabled. It also has this human touch, this human component. Give me a comparable to, is it a software that's going to be a calendar tool, an event? What is the actual business? If you could go a little further on that.
Sure. It's a mobile application and a web application. It has aspects for notes, tasks, calendar, all the things that you would expect, but they're all drastically different and sort of reimagined from what we're used to, as well as integrated with the tools that we all use. So for instance, if my wife and I have a shared Google Calendar, that would be integrated and we wouldn't have to switch from that to use NOPLEX. It would.
That sounds
sort
like
of
a pretty sophisticated amount of coding. I mean, how long ago did you begin this, and how did you fund this till today?
Sure. I started in June, incorporated in August, and
Of
basically
23.
so other than being a husband, father, and human being, basically all I've done was write code since. But I'm happy to say that with the raise that we've done so far, now we don't have to get into this, is very complicated, but if I were to bootstrap a lot of the basis from my own
Yes.
capital, there are a lot of very complex tax implications, especially around a C corp and double taxation. So, for the sake of a lot of simplicity, I waited until I began the raise and raised enough to hire a head of engineering, which I just did, to hire a head of engineering. He begins on February 5th.
That's fantastic.
So that's where we're at. So I
And
can stop coding. Oh, thank God.
where have you implemented it to create your case studies? And
Yeah, so far it was a lot of the validating the concept as we talked about earlier. But the actual application proof of concept is relatively built, but does not exist anywhere public yet. So we are accepting people who are interested to be part of that first beta. So
now that's compelling.
but, reach out to me. I would love to have you.
Well, that's where we need to take this. So why don't you tell us a little more, like make sure we know how to hit the website.
Yeah.
What should we do when we get there? If we either want to be part of the use case or if we want to find out what it looks like to partner with you on this.
I appreciate it. Yeah. So there is noplex.ai. So NOPLEX.ai is the website. Right now, it's just sign up for the beta. So again, I encourage you, please fill out the form. It's just name and email address. As far as investors, I am still in the middle of the capital raise is not completely subscribed yet. So if that's something that is interesting to you and we're in a position where with accreditation and everything where we could have a conversation, by all means reach out. If you're a capital hacking listener, I'm sure that you're someone I would love to speak with in general. But another thing is what we talked about today on this podcast is just fascinating to me, right? It's interesting. I love talking about this world. I love being involved in this world. And the fact that I'm currently building a startup, I have a real live use case. So
Yes,
if you want to reach out at all, I'm matt.canning, CANNING at noplex.ai. Reach out. We'll use Noplex as an example to talk through every aspect of this. We scratch the surface.
Yeah, that's actually an encouragement I do have for you as you develop over time a community. I do think bringing to the world of, let's say alternative private investing, which is our communities, you and I, usually it's around real estate.
Yeah.
But because we've all done some real estate direct investing through, private funds, we actually have some of the matrix in our mind of how this could work in projects like yours.
Right.
But I love that you helped us identify that the SAFE, the SAFE, is the very unique component of this, and that you've taught us a lot, buddy. So thank you so much for doing that. I encourage you to get on more podcasts. You should be on more podcasts about direct private investing and tell them how to contrast real estate to startups. I love the skill that you have and the use case, as you just said, of doing it yourself.
Thanks. And if people are interested in more about that, I know that CARTA, CARTA, has some great online educational resources around safes, how venture capital works, how equity works in that space, as well as Mercury. Mercury is a bank that focuses on startups. Again, some good resources so people can go do a deep dive if you're more interested.
And thank you so much for tackling a very challenging part of so many of our lives is
thanks, Josh.
adult ADHD. And because what ends up happening, I think, for these ladies and gentlemen that are so talented, have so many gifts to share, but then these components of either missing, really it does come down to quite simply missing the accountability or missing the task that they were trying to achieve. It then spirals into self-doubt, and it spirals into real painful emotional positions. And then it deteriorates all the great value that they're bringing to their teams and their world or to their family. So I love that you're trying to help get rid of some of the issues so that they can really get back to what they're great at.
That's the dream.
Thank you, buddy.
We'll keep you posted. Thanks.
Thanks, sir. Talk to you soon. damn straight. We just got
buddy.
We got to the end of another great show. And everyone listening right now, you're the family and friends. Thanks for staying till the end.
That was so fun. And hey, hit the like, hit subscribe. We're here to serve you guys. That's why we're doing this show. Josh is not paying me. I'm doing this off of my quote unquote sweat equity because we want to make a difference in your life. And then that ripple effect will continue to touch the world.
Hey, amen, brother. Please check us out on capitalhacking.com, all the social media threads. And yes, I know you've probably already sent this episode to one of your best friends. Thank you. We love you. Just go right into your iPhone, hit the plus symbol. We'll talk to you later. See you next week.
Share.